Thank you all for coming to our post-show discussion of The Winter's Tale. My name is Daniel Ciba. I am the education director here at Quintessence, and we have two very distinguished Shakespearean scholars who are joining us. I'll introduce them, and then we're each going to share just a brief, maybe 5 minutes if it goes that long, of sort of our own responses and sort of giving a little bit of some context that might be helpful for the piece, and also responses to the performance, and then we'll happily open it up to questions and comments from the group, and just sort of anything that people want to say. We're very happy to have you all here. Dr. Kozusko is a professor of English at Ursinus College, where he teaches Shakespeare and early modern drama. His principal research interest is in Shakespeare and questions of performance, theater history, and appropriation. He is the editor of The Two Gentlemen of Verona with the New Kittredge Shakespeare, and 2 essay collections. His scholarship has appeared in Shakespeare Survey, Early Theater, Shakespeare Bulletin, and numerous collections and handbooks. He is the general editor for Borrowers and Lenders, the Journal of Shakespeare and Appropriation, and series editor for Shakespeare and the Stage. When not at the library or on campus, he can generally be found surfing the fierce beach breaks down the Jersey Shore. You gave me that bio, and I read what I do. And our other guest today is Paula Marantz Cohen, who is a distinguished professor of English and dean of the Panani Honors College at Drexel University. She's the author of 6 novels and 6 nonfiction books, including most recently of Human Kindness, What Shakespeare Can Teach Us About Empathy, published by Yale University Press. 2 of her novels, Much Ado About Jessie Kaplan and Beatrice Bunson's Guide to Romeo and Juliet, make use of Shakespearean plot and characters. She is also the host of The Civil Discourse, a TV interview show broadcast on many PBS stations throughout the country. So please join me in giving a hand to our I'm going to start us off just by briefly talking about the thing that was standing out in my head as I've been watching this production a couple of times. And it's really a structural consideration that I think is just helpful for us to note. That famous stage direction, exeunt pursued by a bear, which seems to be, thank you. It's a very striking moment of the play. And I was looking at one of the guides to Shakespeare I have upstairs. I'm making our education guide for our high school matinees at the moment. Hopefully it'll be done by Tuesday. And one of the things I noted is that stage direction actually falls exactly halfway through the play text. Right? So what does that mean where this notable moment of the production is actually square center dividing the 3 acts that come before it and then the 2 acts that follow it. And again, with Shakespeare, we have this 5-act structure. And the other thing I noticed as I was thinking structurally, which is not something I often do about plays and theater, but the other thing that was notable is that there are line breakdowns for every act in this guide that I have. And the 4th act, which is the whole section in Bohemia with all of the shepherds, that starts our 2nd act of the play, is the longest act that Shakespeare ever wrote for a play. And there are a lot of 4th acts that are really, really teeny, right? So, and I have the numbers here. The Winter's Tale Act 4 is 1,142 lines. In comparison, the Tempest 4th Act is 280 lines, Romeo and Juliet is 407, and Twelfth Night is 222, right? So significantly expanded, right? So I think that's just really interesting when we think about this play being one of the last plays that Shakespeare wrote, when he was sort of turning away from just a play being a comedy or a play being a tragedy to this romance genre, as it's sometimes categorized. And to really think about this emphasis of this very, very long 4th act in which we're transported to Bohemia, and that being a really, really important thing that is sort of given weight, And at Quintessence, We are, although every director makes their own decisions, we definitely are a text-forward theater company. And so the cuts for this production in specific are minimal. So what does that mean to sort of think about like actually seeing the flow of the play? And I probably talked too long, and so I'll move forward to just whatever thoughts you want to share about the production for us.
Okay, I thought it was a wonderful production. I guess I'll talk quickly about the first scene and the last. The first I thought was very well done because actually we were just talking before that Dan felt, and I think Matt agrees, that Leontes seems not to have a motive for his sudden jealousy. I disagree with that. I think that if you read the play closely and the way it was staged, showing the dancing that went on between the different characters, including the two men, that notion of somehow the loss, particularly of the male friendship in childhood, when the play starts with a competitive discussion of two men, servants, talking about hospitality and how competitive, in a sense, these two countries are. And I think the idea is, as boys, these two boys were like innocent lambs without competition. They fell into competitiveness and into adulthood, so to speak, and into heterosexuality, I guess, and the love for their queens. And as a result, this loss was a kind of a trauma for Leontes. And maybe that sounds too academic, but I really do think that the jealousy is directed both at Hermione and at Polixenes, that he was jealous of both, and that this welling up of feeling that Polixenes had agreed to stay because his wife, who was extremely outgoing and flirtatious and so forth, was able to convince him, was enough to tip him over the edge. And I guess the acting, you could quarrel with how sudden it seemed. It could be kept back and bottled up, or it could be a sudden switch that turns. So I think that there was motive there. And then the other scene, which is so famous, is the statue scene, which really gave me a shiver of magical delight when that statue came to life. I think the notion here is we can't explain it, and it's an indeterminate sort of thing. Was she kept alive by Paulina? Were they engaged together in some sort of relationship for 16 years? Or is it actually magic? I think the point is not to know, because the certainty that Leontes had at the beginning is that toxic certainty that we have to avoid, that we see in our society now. And it's that indeterminacy that we need to be able to feel comfortable with not knowing. And I really think that they work together. So I'll stop there.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think actually what you point out about toxic certainty is a brilliant way to think about the play and about this production. I also really like what you said about Archidamus and Camillo, that people just skip right over that. It is so weird. If you go back and look at the text, they're basically like uncomfortable talking to each other, and then at the end, the one's like, "Well, when you come to visit Bohemia, we're gonna drunk your drinks. We don't have anything else to do. We'll roofie you." It's weird. It's very weird. And then the weirdness continues through the first scene. So I always watch to see how the productions usually struggle to excuse Leontes' sudden lack of faith in his wife. And I really liked what Quintessence did here. They had Leontes overhear and mishear what Hermione was saying. She was saying, "We two queens will forgive you if you first sinned with us, and if you haven't sinned with anybody else except us since then." And Leontes heard just that part of it, and he seemed, I thought, to be hearing...
That's interesting. I didn't notice that.
I think that's what was going on. I don't know, sitting over here, I'm like crying the whole play. But that's what I thought they were doing. Like, he heard her say, "If you, Polixenes, sinned with the royal we with me, and only with me, then it's okay, and then sort of set him up. I don't know.
Tricked, I think was the word.
Tricked.
I mean,
First tricked with us.
Yeah, think about the very idea that
Fall.
the idea that it was a fall. They tripped with the women. The women were ruined the friendship essentially, and that is a disturbing way to think about a committed relationship. And not only that, he had to work so hard to get her to agree to marry him. Obviously, he had resentment about that. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, that's all right. The only other thing I wanted to add before we jump into general discussion is that the romances, we call them that. I mean, Shakespeare's company called them comedies. But in this play, Shakespeare returns to that philia, that male-male friendship threatened by women, essentially. Two Gents, one of the earliest plays, as far as we can tell. I mean, we don't know the order in which they're written, but Two Gents obsesses over this question of, is the male-male friendship threatened by women? Actually, I feel like what Two Gents does, if you don't know this play, never mind, but its point is, look, audience, at how sick this principle is, and if you take it to its logical extreme, you've got one gentleman giving his fiancée to the other gentleman as a sign of friendship at the end. It's very unsettling. That comes back to A Much Ado About Nothing, where Benedict essentially is forced to choose between his male camaraderie with Claudio and the prince, or Beatrice, and he chooses Beatrice. And so Much Ado seems to swerve toward marriage, away from male-male friendship. Two Gents seems to take male-male friendships to an absurd conclusion. And this play seems to come back. I feel like Shakespeare compulsively comes back to that choice. And here, I guess the difference for me is that in the romance genre, one of the reasons I think we distinguish between comedy and romance, or want to, is that whereas in comedy, the women fix the shit that the men have screwed up, but then they fall silent or get conscripted into marriage at the end. In The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare seems to actually turn over government to women and say, well, the men can't quite seem to get this right, so let's let the women do it, which is interesting. I mean, it's
The
I
woman,
feel like,
Paulina.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think the play is about, what do you do with something unforgivable, right? His behavior was unforgivable, and yet Shakespeare wanted to contrive a happy ending. How do you do that? You create a magical ending. And I mean, it is, I think that in writing this play, Shakespeare was so aware, and there's so much of the sense in which the woman is the property of the man. I don't know if you noticed the language in the beginning, which clearly it runs through, as you said, the male-male friendship and the male-female, but the woman is always, to some extent, unless she disguises as a man, somehow objectified. But here, I think he was so aware of, again, I use the word toxic quality of that relationship to women, to treat them as objects. And that was the way in which Leontes thought. And in order to revise that, he had to go under the rule of Paulina and lose this woman and his son, who's never retrieved, right? He loses his son, so there's not a really full happy ending. There's loss that will never be retrieved, and as well as the husband of Paulina, although that's substituted for with Camilla. But not the son. And I should also say that Polixenes is left without a mate. You know, everything is generally paired off at the end of comedies, but here you do have Polixenes left as an odd man out.
Well, he ran out of characters.
Maybe
right?
they'll have a ménage à trois, which would be the appropriate end. Because actually, the other thing I just wanted to say is, I've always felt it would be interesting to think that maybe there was an affair between the two. I mean, it's a 9-month period. I mean, you're presumably not supposed to think that. But I think the point is, even if there were, his behavior was unforgivable. And I think that's the point. I wish that were more front and center. It'd be very interesting to have a production that made it seem that it was possible that she could have had an affair with Polixenes. And what's so wrong with that? I see you think that?
humanity.
It's humanity, yeah. I mean, this purity, this, the purity, the certainty has to be broken down.
Yeah. And you just used the word weird. On opening night, the director, who is also the artistic director of Quintessence, called the play strange.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think, as we sort of think about whatever collective questions you have or responses that you have, or for people who might be watching this in digital format later, right? I think that's just I think that's a really healthy way to think about this piece, right? There are so many things in it that are, again, we could call them odd, or where again, it is. I'm trying to come up with the right summation of the sentence, but I just want to sort of create a freedom if people have questions or comments in terms of your responses. It's okay for us to sort of question the things that are happening in the context of the play. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question. So I do know that in ancient Greece, for example, one thing I'm talking about is when you mentioned about how the woman was seen as property. So in ancient Greece, to be a citizen of Greece, you had to be able to prove that both the father and the mother were Greek citizens. And so because of that, women in Greece were they had their own section of the house, they were watched, they were treated as property. And some of that gets into the ancient Greco-Roman stories as well. Do you think that could have had some sort of impact on Shakespeare's view in this situation?
Well, he does combine, obviously, Christian and classical images in this play. Do you have thoughts on it?
Yes, I just lost it though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think that this sense of the woman as property is present in the Elizabethan period. So, you see it in other Shakespeare plays as well. But I think it's being critiqued powerfully in this play, and that makes sense since Shakespeare is older and has evolved, so to speak, to a point where he can see around a lot of the conventions within which he operated. But I think also he was certainly aware of classical ideas.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, he's always setting things in other areas, but he's always writing about English people from the 16th and early 17th centuries. And so, he's got Bohemia with a seacoast. It doesn't.
Seacoast, yeah.
Probably use Apollo in there as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But so as you say, the mixing of pagan and Christian values. So it's really a Christian play about this one in Lear about the awakening of faith, and the possessed. I feel like there are two ways. There are many ways to read Shakespeare, but some of us are running around and saying, "Oh, he's a proto-feminist." There's a really easy and good and solid critique of that, and I feel like sometimes trying to talk with my students, I'm trying to talk them into the notion that no, really, this is the whole point of comedy is that men don't know what they're doing, and that women can fix it, and that we keep shutting them up at the end of the play. So this is breaking that mold.
Well, and that's the taming of the shrew thing, right? Where it's throughout the whole thing there is this potential for what we would call it proto-feminism or some sort of subversion, but then the final monologue that Kate gives is a challenge in terms of thinking about any contemporary sense of gender. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was kind of struck by your description of the toxic jealousy.
Yeah.
It made me think about Othello.
Yeah.
And I find myself wondering, are there other examples in Shakespeare of that specific thing?
Toxic jealousy.
Toxic jealousy.
I think it's written throughout all the comedies. Look at Much Ado About Nothing. Benedict is so afraid of women, and he's just rehearsing the kind of cultural party line, the cuckold jokes, the fear of female sexuality.
But these two both lead to murder, right? Does that occur again?
It's funny though, I mean, when you think about Othello, you think about the Merchant of Venice, because that leads to murder. It doesn't actually lead to murder, but it could lead to murder. And it just made me think, I can't answer your question because I can't think of that, but I was thinking about how Othello and Shylock are both, you know, we understand why they behave the way they do. And it's almost as though with Leontes, Shakespeare's like short-circuiting it. He doesn't want to dwell on all that backstory and all that sort of realism. He just wants, and I do think that the discussion of the way those two boys were together as children is the backstory. But it's one speech and that's it, and you could not catch it. But your point about other jealousies leading to murder, oh, well, maybe in the Tempest, I suppose the brothers are, what's his name, the older brother, the younger brother? Alonso's, I guess it's jealousy. He usurps and presumably kills Prospero, who survives on the island. But there are other cases. In As You Like It, Orlando and Oliver are brothers. The Duke Senior and his brother, they try and kill each other, and then they're
killing both Othello and Leontes kill their wives.
they're killing so you want to know wives in particular. Are there other wives that
Well,
are
no, I was just gonna sort of respond to that, right? Like, and again, I wonder if this is sort of impulse, right? If, you know, is the notion that like Shakespeare sort of did the long form of this, sort of the long form of the tragic version of this before, and so like, what does this mean to like, again, I don't know if you use the word short change, but that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like to do the short circuit version, that's the first 3 acts, so that then we can move on to, I don't know, what comes after in Act 4 and 5, right? Whether it's a restoration or
It's the
transformation.
new generation. It's a wonderful love in a way. I mean, it's simplistic in some ways and idealized, but there certainly is a sense of equality between Florizel and Perdita. And if you look at the speech that he makes about her, it's absolutely beautiful. Like the waves of the sea, he says. She's like the waves of the sea. I can't remember the exact language, but I do think it is an absolutely wonderful expression of mutual admiration and love. And I can't think of any other case like that, maybe in The Tempest, but there it seems flatter to me.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, and the Tempest comes after, right?
Yeah.
So then it's also like he's done this.
He's done this.
He's done this thing. So then moving on to
The farewell to the
Did you
friend.
have a question?
I
Or
just thought
comment?
that Paulina was given a lot of power. Oh, really? I mean, we're talking about subservient women, boy, she wasn't one.
Wasn't she great? She was well cast.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, Eleni is doing a
Yeah.
it's a really, it's a tough character too.
And that's what's so striking about this, the play as it's written and as it's always performed, is that Leontes just says, I screwed it up, I'm listening to you. You tell me what to do. You give me permission. You are in charge.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's
She
unusual,
describes herself
very
as his
unusual.
counselor and his physician. And sometimes that's not taken literally, and sometimes it is. But is she a physician? Is she a magician?
Well, and that's the other big thing where it's like it's so interesting because we have this magical moment at the end, right? But you know, the occult and witchcraft.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if either of you want to sort of respond to that, but like very, very different for Shakespeare's audience than for our audience, right? So like throughout all of those references, right? The reason why the bear is there, right? And again, is it more supernatural than
Rosalind, and As You Like It, is like, look, y'all, I'm not getting into the magic because that would make me a witch and that would be bad. And Paulina has a very similar point to make.
Yeah.
She's like, if you don't like what I'm doing, then get out.
Yeah.
And Leontes says, no, whatever you do is now legal.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the witchcraft is a powerful women. That's a problem for generally speaking, for early modern culture. So
Yeah.
it's powers associated with the occult, with bad things, and that reads more clearly, I feel like, in other plays from the period. But I'd just love to hear some observations about the production from people out there.
Go ahead.
I thought it was interesting that Antigonus was one of the loyal servants. He tried to stand up for, what was right. He even besieged all of his children if he was wrong, right?
Mhm.
But then he's the one that gets killed by the bear for doing exactly what the king wanted him to do. But then Camillo, who's the honest man, is the one that says he'll do it, but then goes and helps Philoctetes and saves him. So, and he's alive at the end, and he's sort of redeemed. I just thought it was interesting. The honest man is the one that disobeys the king's command, and the one
You
that
have to know when to disobey.
right, blind loyalty is not rewarded.
I think that's revolutionary,
Yeah.
right? But also though, I was struck because I guess I hadn't fully registered it, that when Antigonus has the dream, the dream makes him go to Bohemia, but it convinces him that in fact she was guilty. Did you catch that?
This
Yeah.
might have been it. He's like, I think
that she's guilty because she seems to want the baby to go to where the father is. So that adds a little spice to that.
Yeah, go
I was, at the very end, I can't get over that her deducts, I always say, picked up the teddy bear of her brother, whom she never met.
Uh-huh.
But there was a terribly sad moment while everybody's cheering and it's over.
Yeah.
Well, what in the world was that?
That is a directorial choice.
Yes.
Very interesting.
And I'd love to hear if people have thoughts on what that choice means.
Does that relate to the bear that consumes the?
Oh.
Good point.
I never thought of that. I saw the ending looked strange.
Very strange.
Because she looked puzzled.
Yeah, do you
Yes,
have?
puzzled. She was puzzled.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I interpret it as that it's still, it may be called a comedy, but it's still a tragedy. There's still this tragic note. Like Leontes he can't fix his mistake. There's
Mm.
nothing he can do. And so that now he has to explain this to his daughter.
And the way they staged the two, Perdita and Florizel, almost as though separated, and he had a quizzical look on his face, as though now this is a division somehow between them. So there was, in the play itself, it looks like they have a perfect union, but the director must have chosen to break that a little bit, which I think was a really interesting choice.
I feel like more often than not, I've seen this staging at the end separate the women from the men on purpose to unsettle that sense of closure. And
Yeah.
I thought this one was going boldly into traditional closure again, the teddy bear.
The
I thought that
teddy,
was a very, there was a note at the end of the play there.
Yeah.
In other productions, did they use a child's toy of some kind to
I've never seen that.
remember the dead brother, son?
I've never even seen him referenced it. I mean, that's a,
And
yeah,
how
I've
old-
seen this play 30
How old is
times. and never seen
Vermilius
it.
supposed to be? 10, 12?
Let's see, 6, I think, or 7.
Not really? That young?
Yeah.
Reaching age, he's got to be like.
And yeah, we have two different Mamiliuses.
Oh.
And so one of them is doing mainly the public performances, and then we have he's a little older, but we have a very, very young Mamilius that's doing a lot of the student matinees. And so even in sort of registering the age, right? It's so interesting to think about like the differences and how that really tragic moment when we sort of
Yeah.
have that response of the servant coming on and saying he's died. Yeah, did you have something?
Oh, I was going to say about the ending and the bear and the separation.
Mm.
To me, it was almost a hint of that history can repeat itself. It may repeat itself.
There might be a
regarding
problem
their
between
relationship.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I thought too.
Yeah.
I thought
Between the
that
young
too.
couple, between the young couple.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Potentially, right? Like in that again, is that an open question of like, you know, we go to these plays because maybe we want to leave with a solved ending.
Yeah,
Right? There's comfort in that.
definitely.
And so like, what is that impulse to unsettle? Especially what Shakespeare's audiences would have, like, again, you know, you want, well, and even the tragedies would end in a dance, right? Is that, or?
Bergamask at the end.
Yeah.
That's sort of speculation. I don't think we know.
Okay, we don't know.
But Mamilius, you know, one of the problems with a young child is he's supposed to be so precocious. I don't know if you caught the interchange with the ladies, and he's flirtatious. You know, talk about her eyebrows and all of that, and there's something precocious and maybe a little weird about like he's got.
He's creepy.
Yeah.
Read his name.
Yeah, Mamilius suggests the link to the mother, but the repartee with the ladies makes him seem maybe he is unduly advanced because of things he's seen in the household. What is that?
It doesn't say how old he is.
Well, Leontes is 30, and he says, looking on the lines of my boy's face, I backed myself up 23 years, which puts Mamilius around 7. And there are these references to breaching, which is something, you know, kids don't get gendered until a certain age. So I feel like, I can't remember exactly the Leontes age part, but I'm pretty sure Mamilius is about 7. If we want the text to be the guide, and,
Right.
I mean, that may or may not
But he
be.
likes to have precocious, I mean, Shakespeare likes to have precocious children.
And they never,
Like,
ever
what is it, in
end well.
Richard
Richard
III?
the
They don't
Third.
end
Oh,
well.
right.
Yeah.
So young and so wise and never
Yeah.
live long.
There's also that line that the ladies were talking about, what was it, where they like, if we let you, like, what they could, I forget the exact line. He was talking, like, when he was admiring them, and they were talking about how, like, what they could, like, do to him
Yeah.
if they let him.
That was very suggestive.
At the same time, children had a different world than
Yeah,
our
that's
protected
true.
children. They saw everything,
Yeah.
a whole different world.
It wasn't a protected
for the
idea of
children.
childhood.
Now,
Yeah.
it's, you know, they can't see anything ever until they're 44.
That's you. Until they're 37.
I also wonder if Shakespeare meant for the audience to recall the child, since the child gives the play its name, The Winter's Tale. So
Yeah.
it's like you have to hold this kid in your head the whole time you're watching.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did Shakespeare know so much about hillbillies?
Clowns, as he called them. Yeah.
I don't know, do either of you have sort of responses in terms of that? Again, another very strong directorial choice. And again, I think for me, personally, it sort of goes back to like, what do we do with Shakespeare's clowns, right? There is so much context that would just, and again, the other play that we're doing, so this is the Transformation Repertory. We're doing this in rotating rep with Ben Jonson's The Alchemist. And so, again, there is sort of this notion of like, you know, so what choices do actors have to make when the context, which would have been more apparent, the jokes, the actual reason for the jokes would have, like, you have to, like, what do you do with that? How do we address that so that it is, the funny moments are still funny, even though we might not know what some of those specific words mean.
Well, I think you make it very physical, and some people like that and some people don't. I know my husband doesn't like that business because it's, right?
Until then, we had no idea who you were.
Just got outed.
Married to Polonium.
What did you say?
Married to Polonium.
What did you think of the children? Sorry, some.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did
I
you
loved
think?
it. I thought that was just refreshing. I didn't expect it. It seemed to work really well. I suspected that there were something like hillbillies back in the day, you know, clowns, but like
Rustics.
these are like
Rustics.
shepherds. You know, I guess a shepherd is, you know, something like
The stereotype is a lot older than the 20.
Yeah, right. Is that the way it's normally done, or is there other ways to play
feel like
that?
I think it's
I think
normally
more often
done.
than
I
not,
mean,
yeah.
with different variations of the same that you saw, very broadly done. And funny, it's supposed to be really
I
broadly
feel like
funny.
the energy really comes up, and the cast were fantastic at that. I thought you're
Yeah.
bringing the comedy in. Like you just watched the most depressing. It's like the first. Oh my! It's terrible, right? It reminded me of Mad Max Fury Road. It's just like an onslaught, of just terrible awfulness, and then you get that. I don't know.
Shepherd, yeah.
I like it when they stage Antigonus as actually drawing the bear away from the child, which is not possible here. But I like the bear. The bear was great.
Yeah.
The
it was
bear was
really good.
wonderful.
And Autolycus was good, I thought, too. I mean, again, you can't understand a lot of what he's saying, but I thought he did a good job giving the sense that he was a con artist of the first order. And that was it's a nice motif, and he was well cast, I thought.
Plus he plays guitar.
Yeah. That was nice. So what did other people like, particularly, or maybe not like? I'm just curious.
It's interesting. I thought it was good over the top with fun.
With the business?
And also the Appalachian accent after a while got me. I just didn't want to say, it's okay, goodbye, it's enough.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate that, they have to really do that and get into it so that it changes the complexions, and then you go back to the other.
Yeah.
Leontis delivered his lines like in the first half of the show, often like shouting. So he was always like at his head. So I was wondering if that was a specific choice for this moment, that he's just like he's lost it, he's done, or that.
This is why I say the play is deliberately awful for that actor, like by design,
Because you played the role.
The lines-
You played the role in college.
I don't have proper acting training, so a person like me couldn't be expected to do that well. But I feel like that is the problem. You get a good actor, and the lines will bring the actor to 10 immediately, as you saw. It's really hard not to get to 10, and so I've always suspected that these late plays, written for a different theatrical space, at least arguably, must have done something with stylization, a different sort of acting that, I mean, there's no way to get through all of those lines without half the cast is just crying the whole time, and then they have a screaming. It doesn't make any sense. It certainly isn't easy to watch, so I've always thought maybe there was some experimental delivery or something. I mean, the lines, the enjambment, the way that the verse is built is really weird.
It's a trap.
As if Shakespeare had a real problem with Burbage and was going to really torture him with the play.
With the hardest thing he could possibly
Yeah.
come up with. That, I
It's
think
really
that's a
difficult.
fabulous theory. The actor that he knew would play this role.
It's an irresponsible
Yeah.
theory, but I'm sticking with
I-
it. Any criers out there? Am I the only one over here crying?
You were crying?
Oh my God.
There-
There
Oh,
were a couple instances
Yeah.
during where I was tearing up a little bit.
Yeah.
the statue
Don't
coming
they?
to life was like very moving. Before that, you mean for Hermione's sake, you were crying? Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think the statue that came to life is the true, like, full queen, or is she one that is sort of like a version that's able to cope with having lost a child? Because she didn't mention anything about the son that she lost. She seems just to be this perfect version that's able to be the queen again.
So what's the question?
Is she the same as the one that died, or is she like another version that's there to replace the queen?
Well, they say that she has wrinkles, right? Her
She
dad-
says I preserved myself for
So-
16 years.
Yes.
But I really like what Paula said at the beginning, that certainty is the problem. That's
Yeah.
like
You're
brilliant.
trying
I
to
can't
get
wait
us
see
to
this play.
tell
Like,
you.
it's
You
great.
can't,
It's
it's
great, it's
impossible.
ambiguous. It
Yeah.
should be.
And the line that comes
I
out,
love that.
that's come out to my ear, having watched it a couple of times, is Paulina's line about faith,
Yeah.
right? We just have to trust, right? Whatever that is. The other thing that I've read is that because Shakespeare would have been familiar with classical models, there is a Euripides play called Alcestus. That's about a king who, rather than dying himself, his wife takes his place and goes to Hades, and then he sends I think it's Hercules.
Hercules.
Yeah, he sends Hercules to Hades to bring the wife back, but the wife cannot speak once the wife is back. And again, the thing that I've read in some scholarship is that's what this moment is ghosting a little bit. Is that story? I don't know if that's true.
She never speaks to Leontes, if you notice that. She only speaks to her daughter.
Yeah. So again, and that's like really like from the Greek perspective, like that's really like something really magical, right? Like some sort of shade that's back from Hades. Again, it is the indeterminacy that in the Winter's Tale that is very, very different. Where it's like we don't know what the extent. Yeah.
It's also interesting that they name Shakespeare names Elizabethan, I believe, sculptor as the person, I can't remember the name of.
Giuliano Romano.
Yeah, Romano. Is that right? Yeah. Who did the sculpture, which is an interesting, insertion of something contemporary into the play, obviously meant to rouse us. But also the art-nature dichotomy always at work in Shakespeare. And he's so, I think, what was it that I was thinking about the other day with that? The Hamlet and the Players, for example. I was just reading Hamlet with a group of people. And the idea that art, or, in the case of art for Shakespeare, it's the play, is both penetrates life and is apart from life. And that dichotomy is constantly, I think, at work with him. How much does art affect life? How much is it a detachment from life? And I think that he's maybe playing around with that with the statue.
If the king and Hermione at the well, she doesn't speak to him, but she does hug him and kiss him, I guess, didn't she?
Yeah.
Well, do they go off being happily married again, or what?
You tell me.
No, right? It can't be.
Well, like what happens when they're not in a public place, right? Like what does Hermione drop?
She kills him.
Oh, yeah, one thing that I was going to say about the Aeschylus play is that Hercules actually makes the king remarry his dead wife.
Oh yeah.
So when we had the advisor say, "I'm going to decide who you marry," I kind of thought we were going in that direction too. Like before.
Yeah. Again, it's like the Greek story is not. It's not like lined up. I mean, Shakespeare was also with the sources was also very liberal in many, right? Yeah. Where like whatever source text he was using, he was always putting his own stamp and choices on it. But yeah, that's one of the things
I think we're probably no more or less unsettled. I feel like my students are always saying, well, back then women didn't matter, so nobody would have cared about. Like, I don't think it doesn't make sense to me. There must be some kind of, this is a more irresponsible speculation, but there must be some kind of continuity in the way these plays came to affect their early audiences with how they affect them now. I mean, the earliest records we have of productions of Othello, people writing diary entries about how moving it was, how upset they were on behalf of Desdemona. The earliest records we have of Two Gentlemen of Verona getting performed, they're rewriting it because they can't stand the things that the people do. I feel like there's got to be some bulk of what we're watching in these plays that have the same effect on early audiences. And so if we're uncomfortable with the notion that Leontes and Hermione are going to go off and live happily ever after, we're not just uncomfortable because we're in the 21st century. I feel like it's in the play to start with.
I agree with you. My students like to have suggested that Hermione and Paulina had a relationship for 16 years. And now, because the daughter has come back, she's going to reassert herself into the heterosexual relationship. So.
What's the makeup of Shakespeare's audiences in terms of?
Well, the audience for this, where was this performed?
This would have been at the Blackfriars. Right,
yeah.
because and it's actually interesting with the two plays we're doing in Rep, right? They both, this one is 1610, and then Alchemist is 1611. And so, again, I think that's one of the interesting things about these two plays in conversation with each other. There would have been the plague, that another outbreak of the plague that would have shut down. And so Shakespeare and Johnson would have gone off to write these two separate plays. And then they would have been part of that reopening. Again, a little different than our reopening, because the plague was continued, right, and there were multiple times it would have shut down. But, yeah.
The question I'm asking was that the audience, I mean, our audiences are about 50% male and female, was that?
I
Was it
think so.
Shakespeare's day? Or do you
Yeah.
know, or-
I think it was male and female, and it was more class difference than probably you would have at a play here, a Shakespeare play now.
Yeah.
And, you had people who really were totally uneducated, and you had the aristocracy coming, and so I think also the clowns and so forth were for the populace. And I think Shakespeare had an understanding of class difference that maybe other playwrights like Ben Jonson didn't have. So that gave him a wider appeal.
Or maybe the clowns are there for the Blackfriars audience to laugh at.
Yeah.
But so this would have played at the Blackfriars, which would have had a more well-heeled audience. But
Well, that's the indoor?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, so as opposed to the Globe, which is sort of the outdoor, sort of O-shaped one.
So the
that had
groundlings
burnt
would
down,
be
right?
exposed to the elements.
although at this point it had been rebuilt, and these plays presumably would have played both spaces.
Huh.
Blackfriars indoors for bad weather, play private, bespoke performances, but the same plays would have hit the public stage as well, as far as we know. I could be wrong about that. I haven't looked at that stuff in decades. But yeah, the audience, I feel like there would be probably more, boys had more freedom, so you'd have apprentices, etc. There are plays in which apprentices go to the theater, and it's and that's depicted on part of the stage.
But there were women in the theater, yeah.
All right, so this is gonna be our last.
I was gonna ask, I should have researched this, but what's with the title? Like, is it like half of it in the spring and then there's the Harvest Festival, and is the winter a metaphor as opposed to any kind of time period of the play?
Well, what is the reference to the winter? What does he say?
It says, sad tales best for
For
winter.
winter. Well, yeah, I think that's it. There's the shearing festival in the second half, right, which is, I guess, spring. And, that we didn't talk about it, but the discussion of the flowers, which is so interesting, because when they have the discussion about the flowers, Perdita and, what's his name, Polixenes are actually taking opposite positions from their actual position. She's saying, I won't have a flower in my garden that's grafted. And he's saying, you should, that's part of nature, to graft two types onto each other, which is intermarriage, right? But then he turns on it, but I don't think it's really because he's against the lower class woman, but it's that his son kept this away from him, although it's represented as both.
And I don't know, I'm just thinking this right now, and I don't know, again, it's speculation, I don't know. But I wonder if there is something in sort of the change of the seasons, right? Again, we do have that 16, 17-year gap that happens, but to sort of think about starting the play in sort of a fall, moving to winter, getting to spring for the fourth act, and then again, is there some sort of summer that happens? Again, sort of that rotation of the seasons, maybe? But again, that would just be my reading, and more based on the production than Shakespeare intending that.
Is there a frozen quality to that jealousy?
Sure.
And we can leave
I
that
like
in
that.
winter, right?
Yeah.
That was some jealousy. Woo.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I do want to, we're going to continue doing these post-show discussions. We also have our adult classes. The director of Ben Jonson's The Alchemist is actually going to lead a Shakespeare rhetoric soliloquy class that's 4 weeks. So if you're interested, you can come reach out to me, or you can find it on our website. It's not tomorrow, but the following 4 Mondays in the evening. If you're interested, he's a wonderful actor and a really, really good director. And so thank you all for coming.